January 15th, 1966, 1:30 in the morning. While most of Nigeria slept, a group of young army officers moved through the darkness with a mission that would forever alter the destiny of Africa's most populous nation. In the span of just a few hours, Nigeria's prime minister would be dead. The premier of the northern region would be assassinated in his bedroom. The minister of finance would be killed. Senior military officers would fall. And a young nation, barely 6 years into independence, would plunge into chaos that would eventually claim over 1 million lives. This is the untold story of Nigeria's first military coup, a story of idealism and blood, of revolutionaries and their dreams, of ethnic suspicion and national tragedy. This is a story of the night that changed Nigeria forever. To understand why these young officers felt compelled to stage a coup, we must first understand the Nigeria they inherited. On October 1st, 1960, Nigeria gained independence from Britain amid great celebration and hope. The green and white flag was raised. Fireworks lit up the Lagos sky. A new nation was born. But this new nation was far from united. Nigeria was divided into 3 powerful regions, each dominated by a different ethnic group. In the north, the House of Fulani. In the west, the Yoruba. In the east, the Igbo. Each region had enormous autonomy, its own government, its own budget, its own ambitions. Leading this delicate federation were 2 northern giants. Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, known as the Golden Voice of Africa, served as federal prime minister. But the real power in northern Nigeria belonged to Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardona of Sokoto, who served as premier of the northern region. Ahmadu Bello was a descendant of Usman Dan Fodio, the 19th century Islamic reformer who had founded the Fulani Empire. He was educated, charismatic, and dedicated to modernizing the north. He established Ahmadu Bello University, the Bank of the North, and countless development projects. His portrait would eventually grace the 200 naira note. But to many Southerners, Ahmadu Bello represented northern dominance. The North had more than half of Nigeria's population, and therefore controlled the federal government through the Northern People's Congress. Critics accuse him of northernization policies that favored his region while marginalizing the South. By 1965, Nigeria was descending into chaos. The western region had become a powder keg of violence following elections that were widely seen as rigged. Houses were burned. Politicians were attacked. The phrase Operation Wetty became infamous, referring to the practice of dousing opponents with gasoline and setting them ablaze. In the federal government, corruption was rampant. The Minister of Finance, Chief Festus Okatibo, was known for his ostentatious lifestyle. He wore flamboyant clothes, drove expensive cars, and flaunted his wealth while ordinary Nigerians struggled. He became a symbol of everything wrong with the political class. But in the barracks, a different Nigeria was taking shape. Young military officers, many of them university-educated, watched with growing disgust. They had been trained in Britain and the United States. They believed in discipline, merit, and service. What they saw in Lagos was the opposite: tribalism, corruption, and incompetence. Among these young officers was a 29-year-old Igbo major named Chukwuma Kaduna Nziogu. Born in Kaduna to Igbo parents from Okpanem in present-day Delta State, Nziogu was a product of the North. He spoke fluent Hausa. He understood Northern culture. And he was utterly committed to cleaning up Nigeria. As chief instructor of the Nigerian Military Training College in Kaduna, Nziogu was in the perfect position to organize something audacious. He had access to troops. He could conduct military exercises without arousing suspicion. And he had willing accomplices. Nziogu was not alone. The conspiracy included Major Emmanuel Ifejuna, a Nigerian Olympic high jumper who would lead operations in Lagos. Major Adewale Ademoyega, who would later write a controversial book about the coup called Why We Struck. Major Timothy Onwuatugu, Major Chris Enufro, Major Humphrey Chukwuka, and Major Don Okafor. Yes, most of the leaders were Igbo. This fact would later fuel accusations that the coup was an Igbo plot to seize power. But the plotters insisted their motivation was patriotic, not ethnic. They wanted to save Nigeria from corrupt politicians and regional divisions. In August 1965, the Inner Circle began serious planning. They called their operation Demisa in Kaduna and New Wash in Lagos. The plan was simple but devastating: simultaneously strike in 3 cities, Kaduna, Lagos, and Ibadan, kill the political and military leadership, seize power, announce a revolution. What could possibly go wrong? In Kaduna, on the night of January 14th, Major Nzeogwu held what appeared to be a routine military exercise called Operation Demisa. Troops were assembled, vehicles were fueled, weapons were distributed. The brigade major, Alfonso Keshi, had even sent circulars to all units asking them to contribute troops to the exercise. By the time Major Keshi realized something was wrong, it was too late. At midnight, Nzeogwu gathered his officers and revealed the truth. This was no exercise. This was a revolution. They would strike at 1:30 a.m. precisely. The first target was a residence of Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardona of Sokoto, in the exclusive Kaduna Government Reserve area. At approximately 1:30 a.m., Nzeogwu and his soldiers arrived at the Sardona's residence. They encountered resistance from the guards. Shots were fired. The guards fell. The soldiers began breaking down doors, shouting for the Sardona. According to intelligence reports and eyewitness accounts later revealed in British diplomatic dispatches, Ahmadu Bello was not in the main house. He was upstairs in the rear annex with his senior wife, Hafsatu, his second wife, Gogan Kano, his third wife, Jabo Burning Kebi, and a house retainer named Salama. Ali Sakin Mota, the Sardona's chief driver, later recounted the terrifying moments. He said one of the soldiers asked him in English where the Sardona was. He pretended not to understand. The soldier then asked in Hausa, "Ina Sardona? Where's the Sardona?" Ali told them he hadn't seen the premier since their return from playing cards earlier that evening. He was lying, trying to protect his boss. One of the Sardona's wives saw him in his jalabia, a long traditional gown, without a cap. She handed him a wrapper to disguise himself and urged him to flee. But the Sardona refused. He reportedly said, "What they are looking for is here." Ali rushed toward the Sardona, trying to lead him to his room for safety. But a gunshot rang out, separating them. The electricity had been cut. In the darkness and confusion, the Sardona's daughter Ino saw him and ran toward him. The soldiers followed her. One of the soldiers shouted, "Where's Ahmadu Bello?" And Sir Ahmadu Bello responded, "I am here." He was standing near the toilet. His senior wife, Hafsatu, held him tight. A soldier ordered her to leave and save herself. She refused, saying she preferred to die with her husband. Both were shot dead. The Sardona of Sokoto, the most powerful politician in northern Nigeria, was dead at age 55. But Nzeogwu's team wasn't finished. They moved to the residence of Brigadier Samuel Ademilagun, commander of the 1st Brigade. Ademilagun was shot and killed. His pregnant wife was also killed in the attack. They then killed Colonel Ralph Shodine, the deputy commander. 300 miles away in Lagos, the federal capital, Major Emmanuel Ifejuna commanded the coup operations. Lagos was the most critical target. If they controlled Lagos, they controlled Nigeria. The plan was for Ifejuna to arrest Prime Minister Balewa, neutralize the Army Commander General Johnson Ironsi, and seize a Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation to announce a revolution to the nation. But from the start, everything went wrong. Ifejuna's team successfully kidnapped Prime Minister Balewa from his residence. At gunpoint, the Golden Voice of Africa was forced into a vehicle. They also captured Finance Minister Festus Okatibo from his home. Both men were driven to a remote location along the Lagos-Abeokuta Road, near OTA in present-day Ogun State. There, in a forested area approximately 3 kilometers from a police checkpoint, both men were executed. Their bodies were dumped in the bush. But the coup was unraveling. Major Ifejuna failed to neutralize General Ironsi, the army commander, who was supposed to be arrested at a wedding party the night before. Ironsi escaped the plotters and quickly organized loyalist forces. The plan to seize a broadcasting station and announce the military takeover also failed. Major Ademoyiga, who was supposed to make the announcement, never got the chance. In Ibadan, the Western Region capital, the coup plotters targeted the premier, Samuel Akintola. Akintola was widely hated in the West. His government was seen as illegitimate, imposed by the federal government after rigged elections. When the soldiers arrived at Akintola's residence, he didn't go quietly. According to reports, Akintola grabbed a pistol and fired back at the soldiers. A gun battle erupted. Akintola was shot and killed. His bodyguard was also killed. By dawn on January 15th, Nigeria's political landscape had been decimated. The Prime Minister, dead. The Premier of the North, dead. The Premier of the West, dead. The Finance Minister, dead. 2 brigadiers, dead. Several colonels, dead. In total, at least 22 people were killed, including wives and sentinels on duty. But the coup had failed. Major Nzeogwu waited in Kaduna for the radio announcement from Lagos that never came. He had expected Major Ademoyega to declare the revolution and announce martial law across Nigeria. Instead, there was only silence. Listening to the BBC, Nzeogwu learned that the coup in Lagos had collapsed. General Ironsi, the highest-ranking military officer in Nigeria, had rallied loyalist troops and suppressed the rebellion in the capital. On January 16, 1966, civilian politicians voluntarily handed over power to General Ironsi, hoping to restore order. Ironsi became Nigeria's first military head of state. He was Igbo from the eastern region. This fact would prove catastrophic. Nzeogwu and the other coup plotters were arrested, but they were treated surprisingly well. They were detained but not tried for treason. They were even paid their salaries while in detention. This lenient treatment fueled suspicion in the North. Northerners began asking uncomfortable questions. Why were almost all the victims of the coup Northern and Western politicians? Why was the Eastern region untouched? Why was President Nnamdi Azikiwe, an Igbo, conveniently out of the country during the coup? And why was General Ironsi, also Igbo, so lenient with the plotters? The plotters insisted the coup was about ending corruption in tribal politics, not advancing Igbo interests. Major Ademoyega would later write in his book, Why We Struck, that they were revolutionaries motivated by patriotism. But the facts were damning. Most of the coup leaders were Igbo. Most of the victims were Northern and Western leaders. No major Igbo political figure was killed or even targeted. In northern Nigeria, the coup was immediately seen as an Igbo plot. The assassination of the beloved Sardauna of Sokoto was viewed as an ethnic attack. Violent riots erupted across northern cities. Igbo residents were attacked. Properties were destroyed. Blood flowed in the streets. The coup that was supposed to unite Nigeria had instead deepened its ethnic divisions. The fault lines that had always existed beneath Nigeria's surface were now ripped wide open, bleeding and raw. And General Ironsi, despite his good intentions, made it worse. On May 24, 1966, General Ironsi issued Decree No. 34, the Unification Decree. With a stroke of a pen, he abolished Nigeria's regional system and declared Nigeria a unitary state. Ironsi believed he was solving Nigeria's problems. No more regional governments competing with the federal government. No more ethnic divisions. One Nigeria, united and strong. But to Northerners, this was a final proof of an Igbo conspiracy. The North's population advantage had always guaranteed them political power in a federal system. But in a unitary state, Southern education and economic advantages would dominate. The Unification Decree was seen as an Igbo power grab. Rumors spread like wildfire. Igbo officers were being promoted over Northern officers. Ironsi was practicing ethnic favoritism. Plans were being made to eliminate Northern soldiers. The whispers became shouts. In the barracks, Northern soldiers began plotting revenge. On the night of July 28, 1966, just 6 months after the first coup, Northern soldiers launched a counter-coup. It was brutal and bloody. Led by Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Mohammed and other Northern officers, the mutiny began at midnight in Abeokuta. It quickly spread to Lagos, Ibadan, and other cities. On July 29th, General Ironsi was visiting Ibadan. He was staying with Lieutenant Colonel Adekan Fajui, the military governor of western Nigeria. Northern soldiers stormed the government house, arrested both men, and took them away. Their bodies were never officially found. It is believed they were tortured and killed, their bodies disposed of in the bush. Across Nigeria, Igbo soldiers and officers were targeted. In what became known as the July massacres, hundreds of Igbo military personnel were hunted down and killed. It was ethnic cleansing in uniform. By August 1st, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a Christian from the Middle Belt, had emerged as Nigeria's new military leader. The northern officers had wanted Murtala Muhammad to take power, but Gowon was seen as more acceptable to international allies. The counter-coup was complete. The revenge was exacted. But the bleeding was far from over. In the months following the July counter-coup, anti-Igbo pogroms erupted across northern Nigeria. Thousands of Igbo civilians were massacred in Kano, Jos, Zaria, and other northern cities. Homes were destroyed. Businesses were looted. Women were raped. Children were killed. An estimated 1 to 3 million Igbo refugees fled the north, returning to the eastern region with horrific stories of the violence they had endured. Trains arrived in Enugu packed with traumatized survivors. The eastern region became a vast refugee camp, filled with anger, grief, and calls for revenge. The military governor of the eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, faced enormous pressure. His people demanded protection. They demanded justice. Many demanded secession. Ojukwu and Gowon tried to negotiate. Constitutional conferences were held. Compromises were proposed. But trust had been shattered. The violence was too recent. The wounds too deep. On May 30th, 1967, Ojukwu declared the eastern region independent. He called it the Republic of Biafra. Nigeria was going to war with itself. The Nigerian Civil War lasted from July 1967 to January 1970. It was one of the most devastating conflicts in African history. The federal government, led by Gowon, fought to keep Nigeria united. Biafra fought for survival. The world watched in horror as images of starving Biafran children appeared on television screens. The federal government blockade of Biafra created a humanitarian catastrophe. Kwashiorkor, a disease caused by severe protein deficiency, became the face of the war. Distended bellies, skeletal limbs, dying children. Estimates of the death toll vary wildly, from 500,000 to over 3 million. Most of the victims were civilians who died from starvation and disease rather than combat. On January 15, 1970, exactly 4 years after the first coup, Biafra surrendered. Ojukwu fled to Ivory Coast. The war was over. Nigeria was still one country. But at what cost? The January 15th coup was supposed to save Nigeria. Instead, it nearly destroyed it. Those young officers who struck in the name of national salvation triggered a chain of events that led to ethnic massacres, a brutal civil war, and over 1 million deaths. Major Nzeogwu, the coup leader, never lived to see the full consequences of his actions. In July 1967, during the Civil War, he was killed in combat fighting for Biafra. He was 30 years old. The revolutionary who wanted to unite Nigeria died fighting in a secessionist army. Major Ifejuna, who had led the Lagos operation, also joined the Biafran army. But he was later accused of plotting against Ojukwu and was executed by Biafran forces in 1967. The Olympic hero died before a firing squad. The coup established a dangerous precedent: military intervention in politics. Between 1966 and 1999, Nigeria would experience multiple military coups and spend all but 4 years under military rule. Democracy remained fragile, repeatedly interrupted by men in uniform who promised to save the nation. Today, Nigeria remains a nation haunted by January 15th, 1966. That night revealed something fundamental about Nigeria. Its ethnic divisions run deep. Its regional suspicions are real. Its unity is not guaranteed. Senator Shu Soni, a former Nigerian lawmaker, said in 2025 that Nigeria is still being haunted by the seed of evil planted by the brutal killings of 1966. He noted that Sir Ahmadu Bello, despite leading an entire region and establishing universities and banks, died a materially poor man. No house, no vehicle, no company could be traced to his name in Kaduna where he lived, and was murdered. The victims of the coup are remembered as martyrs. Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, one of the largest universities in Africa, bears the Sardauna's name. Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University in Bauchi honors the slain prime minister. Streets, airports, and monuments across Nigeria memorialize those who fell. But the lessons of January 1966 remain incompletely learned. Were the coup plotters patriots or ethnic chauvinists? Were they revolutionaries or murderers? Were they trying to save Nigeria or advance their own group? The answer, perhaps, is complicated. They were young men, idealistic and frustrated, who believed they could fix Nigeria's problems with violence. They were educated officers who had seen better governed nations and wanted the same for their country. But they were also a product of their ethnic communities, unable to fully transcend the tribal identities that define Nigerian politics. Their coup failed, but they succeeded in one thing. They proved that Nigeria's unity is fragile, that ethnic suspicion can quickly turn to violence, that a nation divided along regional and tribal lines is a nation perpetually on the edge of disaster. 60 years later, Nigeria still grapples with the questions raised by that bloody night in January 1966. How do you build national unity in a deeply divided society? How do you overcome ethnic suspicion and regional rivalry? How do you create a Nigeria that belongs to all Nigerians, not just to the ethnic group in power? These questions remain unanswered, but they must be answered if Nigeria is to avoid repeating the tragedies of its past. The coup plotters wanted to save Nigeria. Instead, they showed how easily it could be torn apart. That is the untold story of January 15th, 1966. A cautionary tale, a national trauma, a wound that is never fully healed. In memory of all who died, January 15th, 1966 to January 15th, 1970. May we learn from history, so we don't repeat it.